This is a fictional mindbender, and this is basically a follow-up onto my last video that I did on why Blade's legacy was important to me personally. It goes without saying that the first two Blade movies were great. But of the two, it's the second one, Blade 2, which is one of the best action movies I've ever seen, and the better of those two. Why? Largely, it's because it's a movie about who's the real alpha. The first Blade movie quickly established that Blade is the lion in the urban jungle, and everyone else are just pretenders or runner-ups or wannabes. Even Deacon Frost, the main villain of the first movie, a wannabe king who fucks around and finds out, basically. However, Blade 2 introduces not one rival alpha, but several. From Nomac to his father, to the Blood Pack, and one of their members, especially Reinhardt, all seemingly trying to vie for the position of who's the ultimate alpha in this forest of alphas. The interesting thing about Reinhardt, though, is basically he's a racist vampire, which I thought was kind of an interesting concept. Who knew that becoming inhuman left you with a prejudice against certain groups of humans still? Go figure. Anyways, through all the backstabbing and triple crosses and drama and, in some cases, excellent acting, the movie is in constant flux to see who's the one that's really in control. And this is a dynamic that I haven't really seen since the first Predator movie, which was literally about different types of predators. But, having said that, the second reason why I thought that this movie was so great, in comparison to the two, is Nomac himself. You see, from the get-go, we are made to sympathize with him as a victim, only to be revealed as the wolf. Yet, even after the reveal that he's a wolf, at first at least, killing other vampires. And throughout the movie, he states flat out that he hates them, and is out for vengeance for them turning him into the monster that he has now become. And not only that, Nomac is constantly reaching out to Blade to form an alliance and to at least come to some sort of truce or peace. And yet, Blade keeps rejecting it. And it still makes me wonder when I watch the movie, why the fuck don't you work with him? And then he does towards the latter half of it, and then they try to kill each other again. It was great acting, drama, and storytelling. The third reason why I love this movie was, as always, the martial arts. Now, the choreography in the first movie was good for the time, of course. But the choreography in Blade 2 was levels above its predecessor, which is saying a lot. And don't get me wrong, from a modern point of view, honestly, both movies still had their issues, but I'll get to that later. The fights were not only much more fluid, but they also became much more unique to each particular character. Blade with his signature fast and brutal grace, and Nomac with his straightforward Wing Chun-like brutality that lacked almost any form at all, and yet you can still barely describe some form to it. Reinhardt, of course, with having no style at all, period, and basically just being a brute who likes to bully people, and it showed in how he just liked to beat people down and then sadistically enjoyed himself while doing it. One final note on the fights is that they also upped the brutality. The final fight between Blade and Nomac is the first real cinematic battle to portray just how brutal a superpowered battle should be. Even when I watch the movie now, I still reflexively wince when Nomac swings Blade into a stone column and breaks it with his head. And the funny part being that his glasses still stay intact and are still on his face afterwards. I mean, seriously, those glasses are like Indiana Jones's hat. But, having said all that, the last reason I loved this movie was Scud. Seriously, when Whistler says towards the end of the movie, after Scud's betrayal of Blade is revealed and Blade's about to kill him, and he says,
I was just starting to like him.
I really felt that shit. Because I loved Scud from the start. Norman Reedus brought a kind of energy to Scud that the side character was so charismatic at times that he almost owns every scene he's in with Wesley Snipes. A kind of Gen X, late 90s energy that honestly really played well with Wesley's character. Because that was the genius of this particular pairing. Because Scud is the loud, obnoxious young upstart to Blade and Whistler's gruff, monotone, straight man routine. The newbies versus the veterans, as it were. Or, if you want to get generational about it, Gen X versus boomers. I think millennials were either still kids at that time or weren't born yet, so there you are. And yet, for all the accolades that I put onto this movie, I still have my issues with Blade 2. And a lot of it's not really the movie's fault as much as it was just the sign of the times, how things were done back then. The first being that I really wanted to see a sword fight between Donnie Yen's character and Blade. I mean, you can see them subtly kind of set that up because they're both martial artists and they're both swordsmen. And not only that, both actors playing their respective roles are also martial artists. And I had heard that Yen had even choreographed that final battle. And in my opinion, that I still hold to this day, we were robbed on that score. We were robbed. I wanted that fight between Snipes and Yen. But my second gripe was that after seeing the quality of one versus multiple enemies done by later movies like The Raid and even in the MCU, it's now almost cringeworthy seeing some of the actors at that time dancing around in the background waiting to jump in to get their turn to get wrecked. If you're just there to enjoy the movie, it's easy to miss because the action's so frenetic, and kudos to the cameraman for that. But if you do catch it, it's kind of cringy. And this is a classic Hollywood trope, of course. It's nothing new, and that's what I mean by it's not really the movie's fault. That was just how things were done back then, to make it look like they're fighting multiple people. But in reality, it's just one at a time. Step up and get your ass whooped. However, there are moments in those fights, though, where you do get more than one opponent coming in at Blade while he's still fucking up a third. So, again, it works in that sense. So, those are my only real gripes with Blade 2. And I honestly think that if it weren't for that particular movie, the Blade series as a whole would probably end up forgotten by fans in cinema alike as some sort of 90s throwback niche movie. And again, this is despite the fact that the first Blade movie was great. I think it still would have kind of disappeared because it was one movie. There would have been nothing to follow up its greatness, as it were. And Blade 2 did that. And did that so well, I think, that when Blade Trinity came out and was pretty much garbage, it didn't wreck the legacy of the Blade series itself as a whole. Wesley Snipes still kicks it as that character, and we see that obviously in Deadpool and Wolverine.